Hi, everybody. This is Betsy Wurzel, host of Chatting with Betsy and Passionate Oral Talk Radio. Jeanne White is the producer and writes the blog, which I highly suggest you read because there's going to be a lot of information. I am very excited about my guest. This is going to be a different type of show, and I just want to say if you have young children while you listen to this podcast, you may want them to leave the room. It's a sensitive subject. It needs to be brought out into the open, and here on Chatting with Betsy, I talk about the taboo because we need to talk about it, the uncomfortable, till it becomes comfortable. And I'm happy that I met my guest. I met her on LinkedIn, and I'm going to introduce my guest, Barbara Joy Hansen, who wrote the book, Listen to the Cry of a Child, and a moving book from what I just, heard from Barbara speak about it on other shows, and you're going to want to listen to Barbara Joy Hansen. Welcome, Barbara, to Chatting with Betsy.
Thank you, Betsy, and thank you for having me on your show today. I'm excited about being on the show, and it's a kind of subject that, yes, even though we need to, as adults, be aware, we have to be very, like you just said, with your children, because it's going to create triggers even with adults that listen to the show.
You have such an impressive background. I want you to tell the audience your background because that alone can take up a whole show because you have done so much, an impressive background. You go all over, talking about what you went through as a child with sexual abuse. And, back when we were growing up, it was taboo to talk about. You didn't talk about it. And it needs to be talked about. So
that's
please
right.
tell us how you came about writing the book.
Well, I had to. It was something that was so deep inside of me that it exploded one day when my parents were in our house after my mother and I were watching the Oprah Winfrey Show in 1998. And I was taking in drug addicts and rescuing, which was my addiction and codependency. I have such a deep gift of compassion or mercy that God has given to me. And compassion is a deep feeling of emotion. You get inside the other person's shoes, and I call it Jesus tears. So I was watching the show, and it exploded. And I was about to face the clergy that had violated me in a sex abuse case with the Christian Missionary Alliance denomination in Colorado Springs that led me through this tremendous, hard experience for me. So after the trial was over, with a case with this sex offender clergy that violated me at a camp, a youth camp, and I was traumatized prior to that by my grandfather as well. I wrote my book in a week after 38, almost 40 years of silence. And Betsy, I couldn't believe that I couldn't stop writing. I had all the journals with all the pain and all the suffering in my desk, and I often would think if I died and somebody would discover those grief journals, and I'm so glad I kept them, but I was afraid because I had never even had courage to look at them for 38 years myself. So they were there, and chapter by chapter by chapter, I penned my book, Listen to the Cry of the Child, The Deafening Silence of Sexual Abuse, and it all tumbled out. In a week, I had it written. My husband helped me put it together, and I sent it to my publisher, who no longer is a publisher with that particular company, and I'm in my third publication of my book. with Rostrum Publishing Company. So that's how I wrote it. I had to tell it. I had to write it. And I can't even believe I wrote my book, because when people read it, they say, I can't put your book down, Barb. I said, that's because when God anointed me, he appointed me to set other captives free. So there's answers and awareness along with my story, a lot of information, a lot of how to keep kids safe in the back of the book. There's other resources in the book. So you can get a copy directly from me, signed personally to you, by calling my home phone at 508-473-1280, or you can Facebook me, Barbara Joy Hansen, or you can go to Rostrum Publishing Company, and he also sells them at Rostrum Pub, ROSSTRUMPUBLISHING.com. He also has ebooks available of mine, and you can go on my website, listentothecry.org, or email me at BobbyJoyHansen, BobbyJoyHansen @juno.com.
Well, thank you for giving that information, and that also will be in the blog. Barbara Joy, we tell our children, stranger danger, but it's most likely a relative and someone that we trust, such as a clergy person, or it could be a doctor, a relative that will sexually abuse a child because they like to gain the trust. They have one face to the community, and they have one face in private. That had to be, I can't even imagine how that would be to deal with as a child in the time that we grew up, because how you couldn't talk about it. So how did you deal with it?
I didn't. None of us did, I don't think. Although I've heard some people say they told their mother or their father and they didn't believe them, which is the worst. That's another form of abuse. But for me, I don't know, maybe it was good that I shut down completely. I isolated. Well, isolation isn't good, but PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is like amnesia. You literally are frozen into silence. And survivors of sexual assault or sexual abuse have severe anxiety, and I was unable to tell my mother. I was unable to tell my dad. The only person I told was my best friend, Judy, that I wrote a chapter about in my book, who went through abuse with her brother that had a skeleton key to her room, and she no longer has contact with him. And so we were very close, but we didn't know anything about it. We had no words to tell. Nobody was talking, like you said, nobody was talking about it at all. And I have been privileged to carry our inspirational message of peace, healing, hope, and forgiveness into a broken world in need of all. There is so much brokenness in this world. There is so much trauma. 1 out of 3 of us have gone through, women or girls have gone through sexual abuse. Incest is an act of violence. 1 out of 5 boys. Every 2 minutes a child is molested under the age of 18. And every 5 minutes a woman is forcibly raped. Victims are 4 times more likely to be depressed or suicidal. And in the military, I don't know if you know the statistics, but I've read in accounts, 47% of men in the military have contemplated suicide because of the trauma. 44% of women in the military have contemplated suicide. The first one was men, 47, and 44% of women. And many victims are promiscuous. Now, for me, I ran from men. I didn't have very many dates. In fact, I made one boyfriend take me home in the middle of a date because I had to use the bathroom, and I was so backward and withdrawn and afraid to tell him, and made him take me home, and I can't imagine what he was feeling. Another boyfriend took me out. This was in Texas at Laterno College, where I worked, and my husband and I met there. And it's Laterno University in Longview, Texas. Another boyfriend wanted to park and took me, and I was naive and didn't know anything, and I wore a little sundress, and he started putting his hand down my blouse. And I was shocked. I was unable to do anything except take me home. And I am so glad I did that, because he would have taken more than I wanted to give.
And what would you like people to take away from your book, Barbara? I know there's a lot. You have a lot of material in your book, even though I didn't read it, but I know there is a lot of material there for you to share. But if you had to pick one thing, what would that be that you want people to take away from your book?
Well, you know, if I were to talk to that little girl that was aged 2 to 8 by my grandfather, I would have told her, tell somebody, tell your mother, tell your school teacher, tell somebody, and I could not. So, but living in silence, I'd go to my grandfather's house, and I'd go out. He'd take me out for ice cream and do things to me and himself in the car. I didn't know any better, and he was very aware and very controlling and told me not to tell. Of course, you don't then. So you go, and even when I was married, my husband and I would go there. I mentioned it to my husband before we got married, that I was abused by my grandfather. And not knowing how to help me, he listened to me, but he couldn't do anything, and I hadn't told my parents, and I couldn't. And so you live in silence for all those years. PTSD creates such a wall of shame that, and you know, you're not supposed to carry the shame. Jesus did all the way to the cross, but we carry it on our back because we don't know how and didn't know how to shake it off. It's like going up a mountain. You carry a wagon full of shame. There's basketfuls of shame in that wagon, and you get up to the top of the mountain. At the top of the mountain, there's a higher mountain to climb. So that's, you know, the thing that I would tell people is it's a book of hope, book of answers, a book of healing, a book of courage, book of inspiration. And I am so thankful, not that I went through it, but I'm very, very thankful that I am able to use my voice now to help, even if it's one person. And in the Philippines, when I went over there as a humanitarian aid worker to do my violence prevention work, and there's no awareness at all in Asia. And I just got an open door with a university student of Boston yesterday from the RAIN Speakers Bureau to go and speak to the college students by Zoom. So I'm delighted about that. And you know, it's not even addressed in colleges. So this girl that called me is a senior at Boston University, and she was raped, and she opened up to me and wants to give awareness to others as well. So she's invited me to, do a Zoom with, 250 students, she said, are part of the organization that she just started, and she wants to become an attorney to help women like myself.
That is wonderful. I call it, ripples. And sometimes we go through unfortunate tragedies, and it turns out that we were meant to help other people.
Absolutely. God's raised me out of the ashes and used my voice to break the generational curses. An uncle was also a pedophile in my mom's family with her brother. So God has raised me from the ashes to give hope and deeply wounded and broken people, including ex-cons, heroin and crack addicts, alcoholic, prostitutes, gays, lesbians, anybody. Those are the ones Jesus said are the least of these. those are the ones that I'm drawn to. I don't exactly know why, except that they really need healing and hope as well as anybody else does. And sometimes, most of the time, they've been traumatized by abuse of some kind, and most normally sexual abuse. But a lot of women have had unwanted pregnancies and abortions because being sexually abused. One of the women that went through the sex abuse case with me, there were 4 of us, had gone through various things that I hadn't gone through. And she and I are best friends, and the residue is still on her, and she still has a hard time. And every summer we see each other at the campground where the pastor, who was 27 at the time, and I was 11 and 12, 2 summers in a row he did it. And it's criminal, sexual assault. If you hear somebody has gone through it, you have to tell. It's your responsibility, because those who remain silent about sexual abuse or sexual assault or domestic violence, and it doesn't have to be hitting. Mine was, in my marriage, was verbal abuse, because my husband's father had committed suicide and he stuffed it and didn't deal with it and was like a turtle hid. So those who remain silent about it are as complacent as and as guilty as the rapist they protect.
Absolutely. We have to speak up. People don't feel comfortable hearing it, but it needs to be heard. I know of 2 missionaries that came to the church that I used to go to. Mm-hmm. One was, I don't mean to laugh, but it's ironic. One was, they did a marriage counseling, like a family marriage.
Yeah.
And I come to find out the man was arrested for sexually abusing. And then this guy who ran a mission, I was shocked too that he was arrested for sexual abuse. And my mother-in-law, you're talking back probably in the 40s when she was a teenager, or even the 30s, she said she worked in a church office and the priest tried to hit on her. And she was shocked.
Yeah, because we put them above God. They're supposed to be holy. But, sin is sin. And one sin, we seem to liken one sin to be worse than the other. But we all fall short. And I am able to go in and speak to the sex offenders in a treatment center and in chapel, and have my sermons translated from English to Spanish, because there's a lot of Hispanic in prison. And I've been in prisons all over the world, and I love going in prison, which seems strange, but at least I can get out, right?
Right.
I love sharing my testimony.
And that's your ministry.
It is. I'm called into it. It's a deep calling that most people don't understand. Most people are not called, and you better not get into it if you haven't been called into it, because it's dirty work, it's hard work, it's every day saying, okay, God, what do you have? What person do you have me to talk to today? I've given out my books to people on the beach and in restaurants and at Dairy Queen and different places like that. But every day is an opportunity to start over. Some of us have gone through things in our home, which my house, because I was a pastor's daughter, was very pure and safe, and my parents were married for 71 years and absolutely loved my brother and me and each other. But some have gone through alcoholism or violence or hatred or things like that in their own home, or maybe they have an absent parent or a parent's in prison, and they've become very broken. So each day we have an opportunity to make the right choice. Choose evil or choose good. Make bad choices or make good. And there's nothing in our past that has the right to affect our future unless you give it permission. So it's like the donkey. I don't know if you've heard this story. It's like the farmer's donkey. It was really old, and it fell into a well. And the animal cried really piteously for hours, and the people in the town heard this animal crying, and the farmer didn't know what to do, and I thought, I'll just bury him, I'll cover him up with dirt. And so he got all his neighbors, because it bothered them too, to come over and help him, and he grabbed a shovel and started shoveling dirt into the well. And at first the donkey realized what was happening, and he was crying even more hideously. And then, to everyone's amazement, he quieted down. And a few shovels later, the farmer looked down in the well with the people and was astonished at what he saw. Every shovel of dirt that hit the donkey's back, the donkey was doing something amazing. He would shake it off and take a step up. And as the farmer's neighbors continued to shovel dirt on top of this animal, he'd shake it off and step up, and soon he was out of the well and trotted off. So life is going to shovel dirt on us. We're going to get shame, and then when we tell our story, probably to the wrong person, which I did because I wanted to be heard and I didn't know how, you are going to have dirt shoved on you. You're going to have someone shut you down. You're going to have betrayal like Jesus went through. You're going to have people say, Barbara, you shouldn't be telling your story at Walmart when I sit there fundraising for NAASCA. I'm co-host for NAASCA, National Association of Adult Survivors of Child Abuse talk show. So it's just a journey that I'm on that I never would have chosen for myself, but it is a journey that I never want to get off now that I'm whole.
That is so incredibly amazing. You know, I say this all the time. People who have gone through tragedies, they come out like butterflies.
I love it.
You know, they come out of the cocoon that they were in, and they found their voice, and they found their gifts and their, you know, power, and they could use them, and God can use them for His glory. And you know, it's just really remarkable. And you're a woman of great faith and strength. And what would you recommend for a parent to do when a child says to them, a relative or someone that they trust, could be a clergy person, assaulted them?
Or a teacher in school or something like that.
Right.
Anybody. Well, in the Philippines, we were asked that question because my book promoter and I went into schools and villages and jungles, and ISIS was watching our every move, and kids like 13, 14 had machine guns sitting outside of Kentucky Fried Chicken and the various restaurants there to protect the people, which we were shocked to see. But we developed a program to go into the school with the Barner Christian Academy, and 4 words. And when I'm sitting fundraising for the orphans in the Philippines that have been trafficked and rescued and brought into the Father's House orphanage, we tell these little children, and I sit at Walmart, and when a mom comes up with those little kids, I said, can I tell your son or daughter these 4 words to keep them safe? And usually they say yes. I say, no, go, yell, tell. I said, say those words to the child. No, go, yell, tell. And then I don't go into it much. I tell the mother to talk to the child, and she looks at my book. I mean, I've had mothers absolutely want me to tell their little girl or their little boy, you know, tell them your story. And 12-year-olds have bought my book. They begged for it. They pull out their wallet and they want it. They see the sad little girl on the cover with a garbage heap, with the pot that's cracked and the seed with a flower in it grew. So children need to understand they need to go to somebody safe. Because I could have gone to my father, but like I said, it was so deep embedded in my head that I couldn't tell. And so telling is the first thing to unroot. And to keep the kids safe, don't ignore them. Listen to them. If they tell you, believe them. Don't act shocked. Don't tell them, don't tell. No, it's okay to tell. So when you talk to your kids, you need to teach them good touch, bad touch, feel bad, feel good. Communication with your children is an absolute must. Ask your children, innocent questions, or come to mommy or daddy if somebody does something or touches you in a place that you do not feel comfortable. Don't ever let, even in your home, if it's your father doing things, because sexual abuse isn't just always intercourse. It's not always just touching. The father could say sexual things to his daughter, which often happens, and that's sexual abuse as well.
I had that. Yes. And my father said inappropriate things. And my mother didn't, believe us. And even if she heard it, she ignored it.
Oh, yeah, because she didn't understand it. Neither did my father. When I first told my dad the secret, he told me not to tell my mother, and I was like, why? I'm not the one that did this. Grandpa did it, and a clergy did it. And he said, oh, she would have run. I said, no, I'm talking about the baby mother, the tiny little girl like I was. And sure enough, she held it in for 83 years. And at 83, after watching the Oprah show, she finally, the volcano blew open and the roof came off of our house and it came out. And my mother was ecstatic when I wrote my book. And I had several, because we had brought them from New York State to Massachusetts to live in an apartment, and then assisted living, and then nursing home before God took them to eternity in 2011 and 2012, after they were married for 71 years. My mother was ecstatic. And my dad, I was a little afraid to have him read it because you know how fathers are, and protective, and I felt safe with him. But every prison conference I went to, every domestic violence, secular and Christian, I spoke at, and workshops and various all over the world. I was really starting to travel then. My mother could hardly wait to have me come home and share what happened and what the people I met and how did it help them and various things like that. In fact, I was in Angola State Penitentiary, one of the most amazing prisons in Baton Rouge, Louisiana that I've ever been in, with, I think there's 4 chapels in there. They built Billy Graham's wife, or Billy Graham's casket in there. They give the inmates knives and things to make jewelry that have been become Christians, believers, and there's more Christians inside that prison than you would even believe. And I got the news my mother died, and I was in chapel, and the chaplain was a former murderer, and heard me crying and came over and prayed over me. And it just touched me so much that here's somebody that Jesus calls the least of these came to minister healing to me and compassion to me and pray with me when my mother, my best friend, I miss her so much. I just texted my brother this morning and said I miss her. I miss talking to her, and she would keep my secrets safe. She wouldn't tell my father things that I revealed to her. As a pastor's wife, she heard a lot of things with women in the church and led a counseling course for women. And so she was a real good listener like you are, Betsy.
Oh, thank you. It's so important for parents, and I've said this often on my shows, to listen to our children without judgment. We don't want our children to go out on the street and get advice that may not be too swift from their friends or go join a gang. And do you see, Barbara, that it's like generational with someone who gets abused? If it doesn't stop, then they in turn abuse?
Always. They do not stop at one. They continue until they're caught, and most don't get caught. And I say this statistic, which will shock most people that are listening. This is in Sports Illustrated, Coaches Abusing Children, 1999 issue. Pedophiles molest an average of 120 to 350 children per perpetrator. And that just shocked me when I heard it. They're so cunning, and they're so cross the boundaries and reel you in like a fish to a fish hook and do things to you that you don't understand about. And they threaten you. They're manipulating. They're grooming. They groom you at an early age. There's much deception, and there's a lot of void of trust. People will protect the perpetrator oftentimes in a family at all cost. If you're not believed, maybe you're sent back to the perpetrator. If you're divorced, your parents divorce and you're sent back to him. And that's horrible for a mom to go through, knowing that the dad molested the kids and will continue. And oftentimes, Betsy, if a girl doesn't get that attention at home from her dad, and I had good role model, wonderful, loving dad and mom who was a prayer warrior, if you don't get that attention, you'll often seek it from men, which I did not. I didn't go out and, was promiscuous with men. A lot of women are, but I had that role model of a father that was so wonderful and so loving and kind and gracious. And I would walk next door. Our parsonage was next door to the church, and I would walk next door, and I would see my dad on his knees with sweat drops praying for me. That's at least what I thought when I walked in. That's the kind of dad I had. And he'd stop and love me and ask me what I wanted and take time with me. And if they don't have that kind of role model, they will seek it elsewhere.
That's true. That's very true. I think of a young girl. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Same with a boy. If the boy doesn't have a role model of a father, then, like you said, with gangs, then he will go out and find another family.
Yes. And sometimes, parents unintentionally do that. They cut off the communication to their children, and they need to listen to their children and believe them when they tell them something. It's so important. I worked in a preschool, and every spring I teach about safety. And one of I'd go over what would happen if a stranger tells you to look for a puppy or come in their car.
Stranger
danger. Stranger danger. It'd say, they pick you up, you scream, I don't know you, put me down. And then I said, you protect yourself. Then you were allowed to hit someone to protect yourself, you run.
Yeah.
This little boy goes, Miss Betsy, I could karate chop him in the throat.
Anywhere.
I said, yes, dude, that's when you can do that. But it's so, even asking permission. I said, ask your parents' permission to go to a neighbor's house. Even your neighbor can be sexually abusing children. And it then happens here, predators, let out of prison, and it happens here in New Jersey, and they have a law now, Megan's Law. This little girl was lured in by her neighbor to see a puppy, and he raped and killed her, and she was only 7.
I've heard that story. There's another one that my son lives in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, and he told me that sex trafficking was going on by a biker not far from his home. And he was in real estate, and he had a motorcycle and tattoos, and the young girls were intrigued and hung out with him, and he reeled them in downstairs, did things, and he was arrested and caught. And there's more sex trafficking in the United States than you even know, and all over the world.
I have heard that's very, very big and it's scary. People, girls, women getting abducted for sex trafficking.
Right.
And that is really scary. And they, any one of us could be kidnapped
Yes.
for that. I'm sure they look for younger girls, not older people like me, but you have to be very aware of your surroundings.
I don't think it really matters when you said not a person like your age. With the ex-cons that we met in prison and took them in and out of our home for an 8-year period, which was my addiction with codependency, they don't care what you look like. They just want the drugs. So when they get out of prison, and he was a strong Christian, built up spiritually, probably stronger Christian than we were, when we go and visit, my husband and I. And then when he got out, he called us, and I tried to get him into a drug rehab, which I did in Worcester, Mass, and on, over and over. People in our church would hire him to do carpeting and et cetera. And he didn't care. He got out of prison. That very day that he got out, went right back into the drug world and got involved with a very not attractive older woman. He was the middleman that provided the drugs for the people that wanted it. The woman that he was sleeping with, and he had over 400 women, he told me, sexually. He provided the drugs for that other person, and the woman that he slept with had so much money she buried it in the backyard because they were getting so much money with the drug trafficking that they were doing and the heroin. And we entered that house. We got a call from a beautiful young woman, his age, which was the daughter of this woman that he was with, much older woman than he. And one day we got a call from her, and she wanted us to come to the Cape. And, I'd never been in a crack house before. I didn't know anything. I was so naive and sheltered. And so our pastor prayed over us, and we went to the Cape with, the Holy Spirit tells me to do things, and he talks to me and told me to bring lunch. And so we packed a whole lot of sandwiches, not knowing anything about who was in the house any more than maybe he might be there and this woman that called us. And her name was Tara. And we went there, and it was loaded with kids. The kids that she had, neighborhood kids, crack house. People were coming and going, Betsy, for alcohol and drugs and heroin. The whole time I was sitting on the porch with these young children who would become drug dealers because they were in a home like this. And Tara came outside and sat with me, said she was raised by a Pentecostal grandmother and wanted to know how to get back into touch with Christ. So I spent a lot of time talking to her, and these young children sat at my feet listening to my testimony. And then out comes the drug dealer that we met in prison that had tried to detox for a couple of weeks, and we ended up bringing him home to our house. We called a prison chaplain and asked him, what in the world do we do? Because he's packing. What do we do with him? We were not prepared at all for his world or for what we entered. But that isn't, for me, looking back, that wasn't the thing that I should have done. Now that I'm a grown woman and healed, healing more, women should be ministering to women and men to men. And my husband had not gone through sexual abuse like I had and like this young man had gone through. So, but I had to let go after 8 years and let God, and that's when God started opening up doors for me in ministry and really, as he is now, really using me, because I don't enter that world anymore. Thank God.
Wow, that is amazing. Barbara Joy, our time is up. I can't believe how fast it goes. What is the name of your podcast that you're on, that you're co-host, and how do people listen to it? Where can they listen to it?
Okay, it's called NAASCA, www.NAAS as in Sally, C as in California, A.org. And they can call. It's a talk show. I'm on every second Thursday of the month as a co-host. They can call 646-595-2118, then push 1. It's on Eastern Standard Time at 8 p.m. live, 7 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Mountain, and 5 p.m. Pacific. And the show lasts 90 minutes. So I don't know what topic might come up. We talked about suicide the last time, having gone through it in our family with my husband's father. And it was a very, very good show with 5 callers. I've had men getting out of prison calling, and various subjects come up. So they can get it, go on the NAASCA website. It's blogtalkradio.com, NAASCA/NAASCA.
And are you on Facebook also?
Yes.
Barbara Joy?
Yes.
So people can also contact you on Facebook.
Yes, and my website.
Okay.
I have not had time to put the last couple podcasts. So much is coming around now, and I'm very thankful for that on my website, but it's all up to date. The one that they'll really want to see is my CBN Asia, the 700 Club show that was made in the Philippines. It's a 4-minute documentary of my life. If you don't have 4 minutes to watch it, something's wrong. So it's a very revealing, very eye-opening, and very riveting documentary of my life made by the 700 Club in the Philippines. And that you can go on, listen to thecry.org, and click current events, and you'll find it.
And you also have a video on YouTube, because I watched it when you were in the Philippines.
Yes, I have several.
Okay. So they can look you up, Barbara Joy Hansen, on YouTube?
Yeah, or go on my website. It's pretty much is all there, or contact me in an email. I'll send links to you. Or just put my name in, Google my name, my book, anything.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you, Barbara Joy Hansen. Thank you for coming on, sharing your truth, and God bless you and what you're doing and helping others. Folks, get the book. Listen to the cry of the child. I think parents should read it. Give it to your children, and go over it with them. If you're even, like we have a lot of college age, university people listen to our shows. Get that book. Read it. There should be no shame. And people need to start talking about it. And I recommend going for counseling and helping you to get through. There's help available now. And just talk to somebody. Because back when Barbara and I were growing up, there wasn't the resources back then that there are now to get the help. So that's what I, would highly suggest. And thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for listening. If you missed any of this podcast, you can hear it on Apple, Google. We just got put on Amazon Music, and wherever you hear podcasts, and we're even on YouTube. So you just look up Chatting with Betsy on YouTube, and you will hear the show. And I want to thank everyone again for listening. Thank you to Jeanne White, station manager, and Lillian Caldwell, CEO of Passion World Talk Radio. Be blessed, everyone. Be safe. Until we chat again, this is Betsy Wurzel, host of Chatting with Betsy and Passionate World Talk Radio. Bye-bye now.